Greetings and welcome to TW Now. The American educational system is sacrificing our next generation to financial slavery. If this sounds like an exaggeration, just consider these figures. Today there are approximately 50 million student loan borrowers. The typical student borrower owes between $25,000 and $30,000, but around 2.5 million people owe at least $100,000 on their school bill. The number of people in default on their bill is more than 7 million. But according to a Wall Street Journal article that was run just a few days ago, the United States has 101 people who owe at least $1 million in federal student loans. How can we do this to our next generation? You know, one of the major responsibilities of every generation is to prepare their children for successful life. How can we expect the next generation to prosper with this crushing burden of debt? Now, sadly, the financial crisis in education is only part of the problem. Our program today then will begin with this issue of the financial debt burden we're placing upon the next generation. And we want to move to the spiritual crisis as well. Our educational system has cast aside the moral compass, leaving our next generation without direction in a dangerous new world. Welcome to TW Now, and today with me as our guest we have Rod McNair.
Thank you.
And I should mention, for clarification, that yes, he is my brother. And I've promised to try to take it easy on him and not pick on him too much, and he's promised to do the same. So we want to make that clear from the beginning.
We'll try.
Okay. And also Jerry Ruddleson, who's first time here on our program. We're happy to have Jerry with us here today.
Greetings, everyone.
He's our financial expert and has taught some accounting classes, and so we're glad to have Jerry with us as well. Thank you for being here both. And I'm Jonathan McNair. Glad to be back in the seat here today. Appreciate Mr. Wallace Smith the last couple of weeks filling in, and glad to be back with you today. So let's get right into it. By the way, I should mention, if you do have any questions or comments as we go along, our production crew will forward it to us. If you'll go ahead and type it into your Facebook or the YouTube comment box, and we'll go ahead and try to address it as we go along. So I want to begin with the simple question. What do you think about this crisis in student debt? I mean, when we read these statistics, how do they hit you, gentlemen?
Well, preparing for this topic, I was just shocked. $1.48 trillion in total student loan debt in the United States. I hadn't really thought about it a lot. Of course, I'm older now, I don't have student loans, but for the young person who's going to college and coming out with this crushing debt, my heart aches for them. It literally does.
What about?
Yeah, it's just sad. It's really horrible to think about in a time of life when you think of the college years and coming out of college as anything's possible, and it's time to grab on to life and to make something of your life. And here, so many of our young people now are being saddled with a ball and chain right in the time when they should be in the most hopeful time of life.
And I should mention for our audience as well, I think probably you need to understand that the three of us have skin in the game here, because we all have children, we all have young people who are now entering the age of college, and maybe that's why it's such a sore spot with me, because it is a horrible, crushing curse that I believe we're putting on the next generation. And again, we're sort of in the same boat here, gentlemen, today as we talk about this. So maybe you're listening a little bit to our rant about this because of it. But it's something that is part of the national scene, and we're not the only ones who are concerned about this. And maybe some of you in our audience today are in the same boat, recognizing what this is doing to the next generation. So let's talk a little bit further. So how do we get here? Let's walk through this a little bit. How do we get to a place where we have this amount of debt for young people coming out of college?
Well, there are some conflicting arguments about how this has happened. One is that public spending toward college and subsidizing has gone down, so that the colleges are having to make up for it in increased tuition. But there are others who refute that, so that really doesn't seem to hold water.
Yes, and there are others also who talk about colleges have had greater administrative burdens, which is why they're charging more. But I kind of lean to the theory that tuition is almost not real dollars. Because you know, if you go apply for college, you're going to say, well, we have some loans, it's a package. We have scholarships, we have some grants, and we have this thing, oh, and we'll make up the rest by loans. So here you are as a young person going in, and what's in your mindset? Is it, well, I've got to be able to buy things. I want things. I need things. Maybe it's vanity. I want to be a doctor and a lawyer. Maybe it's, I need to move out to experience college life. So I want to be able to go to this place. And the college says, well, you can come, and here it is, grants, loans, scholarships. It's not real money. So it just increases, increases, increases. The next thing you know, you're coming out of college, as you mentioned at the very beginning, maybe $30,000 in debt. That's your starting.
So is it on the part of the student, where the student doesn't realize what they're getting into and the impact of credit card? In a sense, I say credit card because in my mind I'm thinking it's just like credit card debt, isn't it? Where you get a piece of plastic and you can go get stuff without having to pay right then.
Sure.
In a sense, it's buy now, pay later. So is it the student, or is it the parents, or what's behind it? What drives this?
I think what has started it is the idea that educational debt is good debt. That because you're going to pay it off over your time and being able to have a livelihood, but it's just gotten out of control. And what it seems to be is happening is that colleges have, with the proliferation of loans, that as you read and look at this topic, you find that the opportunities for getting a loan have just expanded exponentially, and so the colleges are taking advantage of it, and they're just just increasing their rates because they can, because there is no real market force driving them down up to this point.
So debt is really, do you think debt has become a way of thinking in our, particularly in the last 50 years?
Right.
Well, you mentioned in our discussions in preparing for this yesterday, it's kind of like rolling the dice. You got to spend money to make money, right? So the people are, oh, it's okay if I come out with $30,000 of debt because I can pay it off pretty quickly. And but what's the underlying thing about this?
So what is what would you think are some, let's say some philosophies or some underlying, we talked about, let's say debt or some of these mechanisms, what about underlying ways of thinking that drives parents or kids to be okay with accumulating more debt? What would you think? What's some underlying drives?
Well, one thing, these things happen so subtly because there's a certain thing that has happened in our history in this country where maybe a generation or two ago, maybe no one had been to college, and so the first person in their family who went to college and who was able to achieve something and accomplish something that no one else had, and attain a certain level of standard of living and helping others in that way. And so that became like, that was the value. And so not wrong, a good thing to have that accomplishment, but it seems like that has snowballed to the point where it can be that it becomes a parent's even a level of vanity in ourselves, that we want our children to do a certain thing, and if they don't do it, then we're a failure. And that can be a part of the thinking.
Do parents compare where their kids are going? And even if the price tag is high, it's worth it to have their kids go to a school that has more prestige for them to feel good.
Certainly, we absolutely know that. On the other end, of that spectrum as someone who helps in the human resources area too. When we're getting a resume from somebody, frankly, we're not looking at whether they went to Harvard or some of the more prestigious, quote unquote, prestigious schools. We're looking whether they actually just have the education and can do the job. But as a parent, we've heard it compared to, my kid went to this school, he went to this school. You know, in North Carolina, it's Duke, or you know, some of the prestigious schools that way. So it certainly happens.
You just offended all the Duke
I know.
people out there.
We love you.
Okay, just want you to know. Okay.
You know, the other thing is too, even we talked a little bit before about the biblical value against coveting.
That's
and
right.
how that there have been surveys in recent years where what would young people want to be or do. And years ago, it would the responses would be more like to do something significant in their life and to have influence. And now the responses are to be a celebrity or be rich. And so how many, again, not saying that everyone who goes into certain occupations is not going to want to help, to want to serve, but does it fall into a lot of, in some cases, well, I'm going to choose that occupation because I can make a lot of money, and that becomes the bottom line.
So the money you make is a driving force. So therefore, covetousness, as opposed to being able to care for a family, be able to be a working member of the community, and I suppose, in a sense, that is an immature way of looking at life, isn't it? Because we all know, and as time goes by, you recognize that fighting and clawing for a prestigious job with many zeros after your salary, at the end of the day, it doesn't really bring happiness. But now we get off into a little bit of another area. Again, we're looking at how we got here. One of the things I would like to ask you about, do you think it's because of the expectation of a certain experience as a crossroads or as a rite of passage, and that actually becomes a big issue? So it can be covetousness, but what about that? Is there an expectation?
Well, there are some, in some people's mind, when they turn 18, I want to experience life. And what a better way to do that than to go to college and live in a dorm with a bunch of other 18-year-olds. And that becomes a rite. You've mentioned a rite of passage, so to speak. That's what's maybe in a young person's mind.
Right.
Yeah.
In our affluent society, that thinking, instead of training, instead of I want more training to prepare, it does become the experience. And some schools have that reputation that they're party schools.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
that is a reputation they have.
So,
By the way, I just want to say one thing. We're kind of painting with a pretty wide, a wide brush, but we understand, audience, that there are noble professions that people want to go into, that people want to serve others, and that you have to go to college to do that.
Yeah.
And we totally understand that. We're just painting with a more general trend of what's going on out there to make you aware of what we're finding out when we're doing our research.
And nobody can't argue the fact that we have a crisis, because now student debt is only second in terms of the debt in our nation after mortgage debt, isn't it?
That's right.
So it's a huge problem. This is not some made-up thing. It's a huge problem. So we're wrestling with why, what drives it, and we could talk about it all day long, and probably with our audience, we could talk about a lot of different aspects of it, but we're just trying to wrestle with it here, and then take the next step. So what I want to challenge you to think about then is this. So what's the impact of this mountain of debt that's heaped upon our children? What will 10 years out, 5, 10, 15 years out, when the other shoe drops, what is the impact on our society?
Well, I think that's exactly what it needs to be talked about, and needs to impress upon us that this is not a theoretical subject. There are so many effects on our society, on our families. For one, very, very basic, when young people get out of college and they are so heavily in debt, they're probably living about at the poverty line. So they're not even able to, I mean, economists want people to spend. They want us to spend to keep the economy going. So there is actually a hit on the economy for young people coming out of college, not even being able to buy goods and services. That's just one small example.
One of the things that drove our taking on this discussion was this Wall Street Journal article from, what was it, Friday or Saturday, that mentioned this gentleman out in California who's an orthodontist, right? And now has over $1 million in debt. I think his monthly payment on his college bill is something like $1,500 a month, or $1,535 or something. And yet he's still going deeper into debt by $130 every day.
Yep.
Look it up if you get a chance. The Wall Street Journal article about what's his name,
Mike Maru.
Maru.
Yes.
So obviously here he is, an orthodontist, yet barely able to make ends meet, and yet having a fantastic income, certainly in that type of field. So obviously there's an impact with this gentleman, as you say.
Yeah.
There is an impact economically in terms of what you're able to buy in terms of goods and services and all that.
Another economic impact is that people aren't able to start small businesses because you don't have the cap. With high debt, a bank is not going to lend you money. And small business is one of the main economic engines of this country. It really is. So it impacts in that way. Home ownership. If you have high debt, you can't buy a home. So here you are. You get out of college. You get married, and then what's the other thing you can't do? You both, because maybe both you and your wife, you marry someone who's somewhat comparable to you, have this high student debt. You can't have children. You can't afford children. Or if you have children, what happens to them? You have to put them in daycare.
Yeah.
And so someone else is raising your children.
Right.
Because you're barely making enough money in real dollars to make it. So
And-
that's what you got to do.
Absolutely, and in this story of Mike Maru, they ask him, well, how do you handle this? And he says, well, I just try not to think about it because it's horrible.
Yeah.
And you read other stories about people who are just overwhelmed and avalanched by this, and we think about we're in a high stress, anxiety laden society. Well, this is just one more thing that people are just having to block out of their mind.
Yeah.
So our own peace of mind, our own settledness, our own happiness, well-being is thrown out the window.
There's no hope of emerging out from under this massive rock. I mean, it's like other debt in our country that we struggle with and all, but the point in this, and I think this is why we're trying to discuss it for the sake of our audience, is that there is hope. There's some thinking that can go into education that actually should happen, that can potentially, at least for parents who still have the opportunity to coach their kids into life. There are solutions, there are approaches that can and should be taken. Before we go there, though, I should mention, again, if anyone has questions or would like to comment on it, feel free to go ahead and send a message. We will do our best to try to address it. But I want to go to another part of this, because I mentioned early on in our program that this is the tip of the iceberg. This is only part of the puzzle, student debt and what education, our educational philosophy, our educational approach has done to us as a people. But I also wanted to bring up another part of it, because our finances and debt is not the only area that has been impacted by our approach to education. And I'd like to shift a little bit, because we are a church. We teach about godly living, and we believe in living according to godly principles. And where we are today in our society is not in harmony with godly principles. And we contend that a big part of that has to do with our educational system. So could you comment on that a little bit? Where have we gone now, spiritually speaking, ethically, morally, in relation to where our education has taken us? Educational
A simple
philosophy.
thought that I had was, college campuses are coming a place where God is not invited. God is not allowed in the college campus.
Why would you say that? What are some examples? What's your experience like in terms of?
We do know that if you read about it, a lot of things you read about it, you can't bring a Bible to a classroom. You can't talk about God in the classroom or on campus, because people now, they want safe spaces where there can be no, they almost believe that religion is an intolerant idea. And the idea of religion, the idea of God, the idea of morality, it's an intolerant idea. But it turns out to be, it's actually the flip side is happening. They're becoming intolerant of anything that is good, in a sense.
Antagonistic towards values that are established by a God, as
Right.
opposed to something that has been derived of our own thinking.
Sure.
Right. You know, when you look at history in our country and of the school system and how it's developed, now we're not talking just about colleges. Now we're talking about the public school system itself. You find that it really has been a social experiment of pulling influence away from parents and away from a local community. We were talking again yesterday about our own father when he was young, and when there was this move away from the small rural school to a consolidation of a number of different high schools. And his father, our grandfather, was concerned. He could see the writing on the wall. He could see how the direction this was going, that the government was going to be more in control of teaching the children and running the schools, as opposed to local control where parents were involved. Now again, not saying that parents aren't involved today, but you just look at the social chaos that is being pushed by the government, and that's exactly what our grandfather was concerned about 70 years ago.
I mean, obviously some teachers, and there are many good teachers who are doing their very best to try to work with children and battle really a tide of social problems. But at the end of the day, though, in our country, philosophically, who has more sense of what's best for children? Would you say the educational professionals or parents? I mean, I'm leading you to what I believe is the case.
Certainly it's the parents, but there are those who have thought that it actually is the educational system.
Yeah.
In fact, another thing that I was reading that kind of shocked me was that the article was something about from Washington, D.C. to California, that it's becoming popular. You know, the newest thing now is this whole transgender idea, and you could be whoever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. And there are states that are considering that the parents can say nothing about this or have no input about this, that this is the state's right to do it. And you're reading like, this is just shocking to me. This is just shocking to me. I mean, schools used to teach to reinforce right and wrong to our students.
And I think also some teachers would support parents as opposed
Completely.
to be.
And there are
in
some who probably still do.
Sure,
We're
sure.
not.
We don't wanna-
Right.
understand.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting. We have a friend who's a young teacher, just recently graduated from college, who's teaching kindergarten, first grade music classes, and he was telling me the other day that that there are a couple of boys who come to kindergarten, who come to class in dresses, and they are so confused, and the parents are actually sort of saying, well, we just want to support these choices. And so we're not saying that the teachers always have the answer or the parents always have the answer, but where is this coming from? Where are the parents learning this? It's from society.
Yeah.
And instead of the parents being able to say and feeling comfortable saying, I need to teach them differently, they feel this pressure from the media, from government, from the society to just support them and follow along.
Yeah. So we have become unmoored from any anchor, any clear guidelines for living which the Bible provides, and the Bible has even been, God's way has been put down, and any godly principles have been almost deemed as fairy tale or too oppressive.
Right.
And these ideas are becoming radicalized too.
Right, right.
And the reason why I say radicalized is because why would you push it down to even kindergarten level?
Right, right.
Let me
Who don't have any. They need guidance and direction. They're forming their ideas about what is.
Right. They're
And
not ready to make that choice.
They're not ready to make those kind of choices.
They're not 18 or 20.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
A couple things for our audience sake. We've got a couple questions I want to go ahead and touch on before we conclude. But I will say this: in the time that we have here, our purpose is to press a little bit of a button here and touch on an issue, a raw spot, you might say, in our national consciousness. And we can't answer all the questions about how to solve the problems, and we don't know all the answers of how to solve the problems. What we do know is there is a God who has provided scriptures for us that give us guidance into all questions. Just because it was written a long time ago doesn't mean they're not timeless answers. So we're going to touch on a couple of things, but I would also encourage you to go through our website, to go read some of the literature that we have on the ways to live life. Then those ways should be taught to our children, and these give guidelines for living. So let's answer a couple of the questions here. So first of all, what's the solution to the student debt crisis? We have a couple of minutes to do this. So what are some principles? We're going to answer that one, and I'll go ahead and give you the second one too. And the question is, how do Christians parents prepare their children without totally removing them from society? So let's hit both of these and potential suggestions as a starting point anyway. First one, so what's the solution for an individual? Let's take it, we can't take it in a national way.
Sure.
In this scenario, but let's talk individually as parents. What would you recommend?
Consider starting at community college instead of a university. That's one.
So look at it.
For example,
Less
in North
expensive
Carolina,
alternative.
you can go to the community college here in the Charlotte area for, I believe, about $1,200 a year
Yeah.
for a semester,
Yeah.
versus
Right.
9, 10 a semester.
Right.
There's one way. So you're not having to accumulate the high student debt.
And look at the big picture and really evaluate what is going to be the best in the long run. I think sometimes, like we're saying, that our decisions can be made by emotion, by what our friends are doing, by what our family has done in the past. Really analyze, take the long view, take the big picture. Sometimes college isn't for everyone. Sometimes a really good technical degree, a certificate, is the best and most logical, and when you analyze it. So taking the big picture.
Okay,
Sure.
couple principles there.
Another one is living at home instead of on the campus.
Okay.
'Cause if you look at
Not cool for kids who.
But
we don't wanna be-
we're talking just to get down to the
Economics.
dollar, get down to the dollar sign here.
Which goes back to community college.
Yes.
If you go to a community college, you don't.
That's right.
you don't
You live at
have-
home.
you
but
have a commute.
But even for, I'm calling them the noble careers, because there are some out there that you need technical training for, a higher education, and we're not against it at all.
Yeah.
But if you at all possible, live at home.
Right.
Because they're talking 40, 50% of the cost
Right.
of what's being on these loans is living expenses.
And some would say,
Right.
well, the experience of being in the dorm and all that is invaluable. But it's a fairly recent creation, if you think about it, isn't it?
Certainly.
And not that there aren't benefits from being part of a college and that type of thing, but is it worth bondage to debt for the next 20 years? Well,
Right.
weigh carefully.
And frankly, other damaging effects in a young person's life from dorm life.
Yeah, we don't have time to
Which
go
is-
in, but
that's right,
we
yeah.
could talk about that for a long time.
Okay, fair enough. So we talked about a couple of things, and by the way, not trying to be self-promoting here, but there was an article that I actually submitted for our Tomorrow's World magazine, the last edition, whatever it was, not the current edition, but the previous one, that's directed towards this issue and making wise decisions for considering further education. So a little plug to read that article if you want to have a little bit more in terms of some of the suggestions. Then the last item here that was mentioned: how can Christian parents parents prepare their children without removing them from society. And I'm going to add without, let's say, living in a cave. I'm reading to the question here because there's something to prepare them. To some degree, do we need to protect them from evil influences of society? I would say so, yes.
Right,
Is it beneficial to have them exposed to the absolute worst possible influence of society? No, it's crazy.
Right.
Just like you wouldn't expose a little baby to cold weather. But
My own son, I can talk about him for a second. He was in public school, a very good public school. We're talking about one that stands up for the Pledge of Allegiance. The teachers are completely with the parents on conservative ideas. But when he reached around 5th grade, he literally begged us to let him be homeschooled. Because some people might consider living in a cave while you go to homeschool your kids, they're not going to have any influence. Well, there are ways these days, there's co-ops and everything. The kids can still be getting together for socialization if that's what you're worried about. But he wanted out of that system and was willing to do whatever it took to do it. So my wife, excuse me, just got a dry throat. My wife and I did what we had to do to let him be homeschooled. And he's so much happier. And he's not socially inept.
yeah.
So there's a way to do it. And you had most of your kids, all of your kids. I think all of your kids are homeschooled also.
It's worthwhile, considering the options in the homeschooling today, and still involved in community and so on. But certainly
Absolutely.
homeschooling is worthy of consideration, easier than at any time with all the technology that's available.
Right.
So what are some other principles?
You're talking about the viewer was asking about what is a Christian family to do. We look at the Bible. What does the Bible say? Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says that you should teach your children these statutes, these commandments when you rise up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way, when you do all of your things. So again, taking the long view and looking at the options that work best. There are so many options today. Going back to homeschooling, I'm an unabashed supporter of homeschooling. Obviously, not everybody has the capacity to do it or the opportunity, but my wife has done it, and very successfully. And what a tremendous opportunity! We're talking about higher education, most of the program. When they're 18, 20, 25, 20. But when is the most important time in their education for a child? It's actually between 0 and 5 or 6. And so to have this prime opportunity to really mold and shape and be with your children instead of taking them to a daycare, that is a huge investment that I submit is way better than wherever they go to college.
Yeah.
Being able to have a mother training and molding and shaping them from 0 to 5 or 6, that's a huge investment.
We're going to have to close it with that, and we're out of time here. But I appreciate you all being with us today. Like us or follow the conversation, follow our channel if you would, and if you would share it with someone who you think might be interested, we'd appreciate that, and hopefully it's beneficial to you and worthwhile for your time. I would like to say this: we're going to continue this conversation for a little while after the program. So we'll go ahead and close for now. And we're going to pick up a little bit more on the discussion. If you'd like to go ahead and click on and see some further discussion, we'll make that available to you as well. Thanks very much for being with us on the TW Now. This is Jonathan McNair closing. Looking forward to seeing you next week.